This is a DBT podcast. Welcome to the DBT podcast. Don't be triggered. Today we're going to have some controversial stuff. There's nothing controversial about, of course, the Detroit Lions being victorious in their last two NFC Central champions. But there is controversial stuff about nutrition and training. And, I wanted to have professionals on this program that have over 15 years of experience. And today we have a professional, a certified trainer who has been a professional soccer coach, has certified nutritional training, and a personal friend of mine who's been doing this has put in his 30,000 hours, as we discussed, over the last 20 years. And these are the people, all of us that have a profession, we know that it takes that much time to kind of learn so many things, with our experience as well as, learning new things. So I want to welcome my friend Aron Dorner here to the
Thanks,
DBT
Neel.
podcast, man.
Really appreciate you having me on. I appreciate it.
How you
It's
doing?
fun.
Is that a UK accent?
I'm holding on to it just.
Oh, good,
just.
good.
Yeah, 12 years on. Still got it. Maybe there's some words. When I go home, people say I have a twang now, and it bothers me a little bit. I have to watch a lot of British TV, and then I get a little bit back,
Do they make fun of you when you go home because the accent changes a little bit?
I feel them waiting.
Okay.
I feel them looking at me and waiting for me to say a word that is changed, and then they jump and pounce on me for it. They're like, there's a twang there. I'm like,
I speak a little bit of Gujarati. When I go to India, they can tell that I'm American immediately. So I know that feeling just quite a little bit.
I've always wondered that about other accents. Obviously, it's the same language but a different accent, right?
Yeah.
American. But I've always wondered that about different languages, whether they can pick up the Americanisms or even British, whatever it might be. I've always wanted to learn a couple of other languages, but it's brutal.
Yeah, it's hard, man. Yeah. It's hard. So you've been taking care of people in terms of giving them advice based on evidence and science for 20 years, and I've seen a bunch of maybe we can start with some nutrition. I've seen a bunch of healthcare fads. I ask you about these sometimes when we're talking. Go by the wayside. And, one thing I really remember when I was a kid was low-fat foods, right? So we were always worried about fat. And obviously in all our food, there's carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Is that right? And, there was a huge push by the food industry to make everything low fat because I think the thought was that made you fat. Is that right?
Right. But there's so many different facets of dieting and the low fat, the low carb, across the board. But the problem, the big thing is if you look at the macronutrients, right? You have 9 calories in a gram of fat.
Can you describe macronutrients? What is the difference between that and
so
micro?
Just the protein,
because a lot of people wouldn't
carbohydrates,
know that.
and fats,
Okay.
right? So they just break them down into those 3 categories. But when you look at the old school macros, right? 4 calories a gram in proteins and carbohydrates, 9 calories in fat.
Okay.
So a lot there's one area of that where they think because there's a higher calorie content, you strip that back, calories come down. But there's obviously a lot of reasons to eat dietary fats. Obviously, some are better than others, as we always discuss.
Yeah.
But some of them have been made to look really bad, and new research has come out probably over the last couple of decades, really, because a lot of this stuff came out in the 60s. But I think that the low-fat fad that happened, a lot of the nutrition has been stripped. A lot of the good stuff has been stripped out of these low fat products, and usually when they strip fat away, increase is the sugar. Right, it has the taste of something. So there's a big switch there, which isn't always beneficial.
So they basically took the fat out and they put the sugar in some form. And obviously, we all crave sugar to a certain degree, and that made it extremely unhealthy. And we're always hungry all the time. Is that what makes you hungry? Right. More where fat may fill you up, even though it has more calories per gram. Is that essentially the point?
Yeah, I mean, there's a satiating element to that. But with blood sugar, spikes and drops. A lot of people can tend to overeat thinking that they're hungry, but it's actually a blood sugar issue. And that can be acute. It's not necessarily chronic. But I've definitely fallen into that, in the past.
Oh, sure.
Because we all, before kind of not even research, but before someone you trust can explain it to you. I have mentors that explain things to me, in different ways that I'm actually able to take on board.
Yeah.
But that was, I feel like we're a bit past that now. But it was definitely a tough time to explain to clients that were maybe older than me that have lived their lives like that.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing and why we're interviewing you, because you have all this experience and you have clients. I know you train teenagers all the way up to clients that are 80, 90 years old. And, I think we've learned, even in the morning when my kids, we had milk in the house, there's whole milk, skim milk, 2% milk fat. Why is it? Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, why do we have 3 different milks? And, and I think part of that maybe was that people were thinking about fat, differently than they used to. And
which I find it interesting now because, a lot of kids, like, I have young kids, little kids, Sloane was born 3 months early, so she's always been little.
Yeah.
And, our doctor's telling us she needs to gain weight. So we give her full fat milk, on purpose. Which so now it's kind of funny. It's like you have to find the good milk. You have to get it from healthy cows.
Yeah.
There are those details that are still important. But again, it's kind of like meat, right? You get meat from a healthy cow or not so healthy cow. Those two things are really important too.
So speaking of that, we've joked around about, as I was vegan for a little while, and I used to really believe on the data that a full plant-based diet, is probably the healthiest diet. To decrease heart disease, cancer. I'm not so sure anymore because I think we have a lot of studies now that have come out that the processing of food really matters. So that ultra-processed food from fast food, which, we all have our guilty pleasures of eating it once in a while or whatever, but that really matters more than the, necessary, like as you were just saying, the organic chicken matters more than the kind of like the processed chicken where there's 100 different ingredients or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing when there are so many details to all this discussion that you can pull good and bad information from everywhere, but there's a huge difference between a grass-fed, pasture-raised animal, from a beef standpoint, let's say, as an example, and a McDonald's burger. Yeah. Right. They're just different animals. They're almost different, completely different things. Same with chicken, right? Chicken breast versus chicken nugget. Like there's a lot of different nuance. There's a lot of nuance in nutrition when it comes to just the word protein or just the source of carbohydrates.
So right now, obviously, so in the UK, everyone eats a little bit differently than the United States. The obesity rates aren't as high. So. But there's fast food available. It's not like it's not.
They're not far off though. I don't know. Maybe on the extremes, maybe on the extreme edge. But I do think
you're gonna get in trouble next time you go home, man.
Yeah. Well, I've gained a little bit since I've been here too. But I do think that the farming practices are just different. Right, how far food travels is also different.
Okay,
how do you have to protect that food source in various ways to get it across country? How far does it come? What preservatives need to be in that food? Bread is another one. Like bread is just,
some of that's just logistics.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And I wonder. I don't know this, but I wonder if that is one of the elements of the industries, especially in the States, when they have to get certain foods from one end to the other, you have to preserve it somehow, right? Where you look at even just fruits, right? You see the apples, the wax covers on the apples, there's certain elements that I never grew up with. I never really saw that. Maybe that's changed since I've been here. I don't know, but there are lots of different elements to the preservative aspect of food, for sure.
Got it. Yeah, that's just interesting. I know the UK also has a ban, Europe in general has a ban more on different preservatives, I think these yellow and red dyes that the United States doesn't have,
Right.
So, we're kind of learning more
even
and more
through
about
Canada.
that.
Even just local, even closer, Canada, there's, the big push, with the red dye specifically, but there's so many aspects when you look at European produce, European proteins, there's just a big difference. And maybe that's not quality necessarily, you know, but like, again, the preservative element may have changed over the years.
Well, you know, we've actually talked a lot about nutrition in the last few episodes. So I'm glad you brought that up because those are some aspects that we didn't actually get into. So it's just really, really interesting. Now, you know, you're a certified trainer, you know, as we discussed, certified nutritionist. And so when we first met, was it 5 years ago, maybe during COVID? I remember
It was training you in your
so
garage.
I told you I wanted to have a 6-pack. And one thing you said to me was, we can get you a 6-pack, but you're going to be very miserable. So I want to talk about, because I think a lot of people feel guilty about the way they look or whatever, you know, healthiness in terms of the aesthetics versus, you know, your strength. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, we see, you know, especially kids, even adults, we all see these images of people, they're, you know, whatever, shredded or ripped or whatever you want to call it. And I actually think, you know, there's obviously some mental health concerns with, you know, especially young kids. Can you just, you know, you told me a few things and I want everyone to hear it from you about what these actors and like, for example, on the last podcast, we talked about professional athletes, which we'll get into too, about they still get diabetes. They still get hypertension. Even the guy that won the golf tournament last weekend, he had diabetes for 5-6 years. He's a completely healthy guy playing golf every day.
Wow.
Things happen to people, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk about that a little bit about, okay, let's say you meet a new client and they're like, hey, I want to get a 6-pack. Like, what do you say to them about, you know, is that healthy? Is that something, you know, maybe you can just talk about that.
Yeah, the first two things that always come into my mind is why. First thing is why. The second thing is how is that possible? Like, you know, and how can we do that? You know, when I remember that when you told me that, and I said, okay. But when you said about miserable, I just said that it takes a lot of sacrifice. It takes time, dedication. You know, how quickly do you want to drop body fat? You know, that's when the health concerns come in. And it's not really about you're going to get sick or anything, but like if you have a huge calorie deficit, your mood will change, right? You have
you won't
kids.
Be happy. I'm happy all the time. So
poor wife. You know what I mean? Like all these, there are elements to.
I didn't even think about that part.
And yeah, right.
So my wife will be angrier than me that she already is? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
You starve yourself.
But if you have a 500 calorie deficit, as long as you're eating the right foods, you can still feel full.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you have there's a 1,000, 1,500 calorie deficit, you know, and with working out, I mean, your body needs to repair, right? You're not going to sleep as well. And that has a compounding effect. So when you look at the mathematics of creating a calorie deficit, there's just so much detail that goes into creating that. And then can you do it over a sustainable period of time?
I mean, the other thing you told me is, which was true, and it's one of the reasons I created this podcast, is like, hey, like anything you want to do like that takes a lot of time, and you're a doctor and you're busy with your life and you're a professional doctor and you have kids and all that. So I think, you know, giving all of ourselves a break is a good thing. Yeah. But, you know, it's funny because now that I read about what these guys do, you know, the Top Gun Maverick movie, I think we had talked about once, they had that beach scene. Like these guys basically didn't drink water for like 48 hours or something. And don't quote me on that, but like, you know, they really just really went to these extreme deficits of feeling terrible just to shoot that one scene or whatever.
And then they had to reshoot it. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't.
I believe it was Miles Teller as the guy.
Yeah.
He talked about how he had to get back in shape because they wanted to reshoot something.
Oh, gosh.
And I'd like to make sure that that's correct, but I'm pretty certain. But you know, the deficits that they have to put themselves in, the strength training elements, you know, the details of looking like that, which in all seriousness, the conversations that I've had over the last 20 years, they want to look better than that. You know what I mean?
Everyone has this thing in their mind.
They're thinking like
in
Brad
my mind,
Pitt.
I'm going to get taller. I'm going to get stronger.
Yeah.
You know, everyone's
Taller would be nice,
that.
buddy. That'd be nice.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know, to create the environment. Don't forget, these people have chefs.
Yeah.
You know, they're weighing everything. You know, and then even the people that don't, the non-celebrities, non-athletes. You know, the details. Remember, we discussed this. I said, "Are you ready to weigh your food?" Are you ready to count your?
My cousin does that, but yeah. I haven't been doing that.
But how are you going to with your job? You got twins.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got 2 in 1 there. So like you've got travel a lot. Like as in
it's a lot
driving,
of time and effort.
a lot of time, an extreme amount of effort. But it doesn't work without consistency.
Yeah.
And the consistency is where people fall off. When the weekends come and it's just difficult is what I'm saying. It's not as easy as I'll just cut out bread.
I just realized we've never had a drink together. We need to change that a little bit. One of these. I should have brought some beers. I'm only a mile from here. Actually, we should have done.
Your car drives itself, man.
So, that's true. So, one thing you brought up was strength training, and I think that's changed dramatically. Like I myself have run a marathon. I still run a couple times a week, but my focus is not on that anymore. In my mind, I would be super strong and super fast if I did both. And I think the research and the data is really suggesting that strength training is even more important really than running as you get older and you have a bad back or whatever, all these, muscle aches that we all get as we get older. Can you comment on the strength training aspect and how much people should be doing and, stretching and yoga and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think that I get like with everything, right? There's always there's always details, right? It depends on what you want to achieve, right? Strength training and not doing cardio if you want to run a half marathon isn't going to work. But if we always talk about there's definitely a place for cardio. It's incredibly important, especially for your cardiovascular system, right? Cardio for inside, strength training for outside.
Okay.
Like we always talk about. That's what the strength training element is going to fill your t-shirt how you want to fill your t-shirt. And that's and that is that. There's obviously a huge amount of importance on that. But the strength training aspect has had a big boost since social media, I think, and it's been hugely beneficial, especially for women. Going to gyms now than even 15 years ago, and half the racks are taken by young girls, young athletes, and everyone else in between, of course. But it's a great switch. That's why we're seeing a lot of records broken. That's why we're seeing a lot of huge, incredible achievements. Myself, I look at the soccer element, right? It's one of the sports I watch, especially from a female
sport
standpoint.
in America, soccer?
Yeah, it's the World Club Cup isn't doing very well from the attendance standpoint, but I think that the World Cup when it comes will be great.
United States, unfortunately, they haven't done so good in their men's soccer team. It's been unfortunate.
But the league is growing.
Okay.
The MLS league is growing, which is great.
Are you saying
really
we got
good.
a chance? That's all we need.
No, absolutely not. No chance, zero chance. Probably about as much chance as England, but we might be closer, a little bit closer. But to the strength training portion, I mean, we've seen huge improvements in your overall strength. There was a period, obviously it's a little undulating, right, with body fat percentages, but we saw an incredible dip in your body fat percentage overall when we were recording it bi-weekly. And your sweet spot has always been 2 to 3 times. If you can get that third one in, it's great. But it does also depend on what does your week look like.
I mean, and I've noticed less injuries, and obviously, so that's part of it. But in terms of overall health, I feel much stronger, obviously. And then there's metrics like pull-ups or push-ups or presses or whatever.
Right, our goals.
And I think I did 3 pull-ups when when we started, and now I can do 15 pull-ups. So it's great. But I think for me, I just think at this age, now that I'm closer to 50, I think 50 years ago what people were doing and now what we're doing now, I just think it's so much more advanced, and we can really. So, your clients that are, in their 80s and 90s, they're still pretty strong and doing. Are you seeing an increase in that because you're able to strength train them and they're not,
in that wheelhouse, you'll have a little some improvement, and then when you hit a certain milestone, it's about that maintenance, right? And that could be 90 might be pushing it, but in the 70s and 80s more so, a safe, systematic way of getting up off the floor, right? The Turkish get up, or the get up, is something that I've used with pretty much everybody, and then without the weight, it's literally just a system of getting up off the floor, and it's an incredibly important tool to have. We always talk about grip strength, right? Can you, if you were to fall or stumble, can you grab and hold? Can you pull yourself up from the floor from a half kneeling position? so there are milestones from a strength perspective, and then we try and keep that. Whereas someone in your, there's still goals to try and achieve.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's still
everyone's
some
different.
stuff. Yeah. So one thing that I always credit you for is that you got me hooked on a show called Ted Lasso. Okay, and again, this podcast is sponsored by nobody. Basically, I'm not selling anything. But that show is pretty amazing. It's one of my favorite shows, and you mentioned to me once, and I want to make sure, for the record, that you actually, the Ted Lasso bar where they all hang out, where he threw the darts and he beat that Rupert or whatever. Like you've been to that bar, or that was your bar growing up or something?
It was one of them. It was one of them. Yeah, the Prince's Head, I believe it's called.
Okay.
And in Richmond Green, which is a huge, just green area, there's a handful of pubs around that corner, and down there's a little theatre and another pub around there. The Cricketers, which is next door to that pub, those two pubs. Pretty much religiously on a Friday after school when I was a teenager, we'd go to that green and play soccer, and then obviously as we got a little older, it went from soccer to in the
drinking.
pub. Yes, yeah. Normally,
got healthier.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that was definitely one of the old haunts, as they call it. It was right. Richmond is right between. I grew up in a place called Barnes.
Okay. And how far is that from the what's the FX show that Ryan Reynolds bought, the team or whatever?
Wrexham?
Yeah.
Oh, that's miles away. Wrexham is in Wales.
Okay.
So it's pretty few hours
You
away
can tell
from London.
my geography is very advanced.
Yeah. I'm not sure how I would know about it if I wasn't from there, to be honest with you. But Richmond is a southwest suburb, and I went to high school. One suburb across, which is Twickenham. So right on the river runs through the middle of those. So that's a big hangout area. So that's why it was basically any pub we could kind of get into when we looked, young. And,
what's the age you can drink there again?
18.
18. Okay.
18, yeah. I was about 4'9" when I was 17, so it didn't work out too well.
You didn't have a fake ID or anything like that?
I think we all had the same fake ID with a different college on it.
How accurate is the show in terms of portrayal of British life and, because I just think it's a fantastic show.
Yeah. I think they did a pretty good job, to be honest. Like, it was filmed very locally all around that
you're
area.
a local guy. You're a real. I mean, this accent is not fake.
I don't think I can hold on to it for that long.
He's from the UK, and so I'm just curious as to sometimes there'll be movies that are made in India, and I just think it's nothing like the actual country or whatever.
Okay.
But I'm curious what you think about that show in terms of portrayal of how the British are in general.
I think it's pretty good. I do. I think it's I do think there's some element, like to your point of when it's filmed in the city and it's all finance and I think that's a bit BS. There's a lot of BS there of the reality of living in that situation. But I think from a suburb perspective, they do a good job. They walk around, they chat about real problems. And I feel like they are, and I think that the soccer element can do with some better. I think the shots of when they're actually playing looks a bit green screeny, but I think in general they've done a really good job. I really enjoyed it. I think the show is bigger here than it is in the UK.
Oh,
I
really?
go home and I'm not, which is kind of surprising because that's where everyone lives around there. The little suburb. There's a little pot of little towns around Richmond where a lot of my friends lived or grew up.
Yeah.
And some people haven't watched it or didn't finish it or something. And here I'm like, is it a humor?
Is it a humor thing that?
No, I don't know.
Because I just think it's a hilarious show. I mean,
I'll be there next month. I'll ask.
Okay,
I don't know. I'll come back the month after and we'll do another one.
Make me. I mean, I don't know of another show that's going to make me laugh like that.
I do think, because I don't know if you know about this. So Jason, what's his name? Sudeikis.
Yeah.
He actually went on TV years before Ted Lasso came out, and portrayed himself as Ted Lasso.
Oh.
It was almost kind of like a Borat thing where people didn't know who he was,
okay.
and he got away with it and made all this comedy, and he said he wanted to be a soccer. And there was, I'll find it, I'll send it to you. It's amazing. It's very funny.
Gosh,
it was years before Ted Lasso.
I mean, just the whole idea of the show, I just think people are so creative. How do they... I focus a lot of what I do on evidence and science and all this, and how do they come up with these ideas, these grand ideas? The writers for the show are amazing.
Yeah.
I just think it's really good.
Yeah, the chap that plays Roy Kent, he is one of the best. He's so good.
His story,
incredible.
I mean, I saw him on a talk show. His story was he's a comedian by trade.
Right.
And
I think I just saw something on Max or something. He put a special out. I haven't seen it yet, but I do want to watch it.
Yeah, but like he was like, no, I can be angry all the time and swear. You know? It's just hilarious. You know?
I think I saw something. He said he stubbed his toe or something on his coffee table.
Yes.
And then he went, fuck. And then he was like, looked at himself and he was like, I think I
could do that.
Yeah. I saw that little clip. I thought, oh, that's great. That's really good. It really makes the show. But no, I think they do it. I think they did a great job. And it's really great to see them filming all around these areas where I grew up. You know, Emily's, my wife's just sitting there going, is that where I think it is? Because she knows the area too.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
So, you know, as we get older, you know, I know you're closer to 40, I'm closer to 50. What metrics should people do to like say to themselves, you know what, I'm in pretty good shape, besides seeing their doctor, which I know you are an advocate for too. But like what other strength or cardiovascular metrics, like you mentioned a few things earlier, like, you know, is it, I don't know, 5 pull-ups? Is it 10 push-ups? Is there certain things where you're like, you know what, a human being should be able to do these things so that as you get older, you know, you're not going to, you know, throw out your back or, you know, because, you know, I'm driving in the car a lot. My posture's a little off, you know, that kind of thing. So I don't know if you can comment on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are standards, right, in the strength community, let's call it, where there's like a deadlift requirement, you know, a back squat requirement, a bench press requirement. But when it comes to general population, it's really about, you know, if you can't do a push-up, we need to get you to be able to do a push-up. If you can do a push-up, we need to get you to do X number. If you can only do 8, let's get you to 15. So like in general, there are metrics, you know, can you do a pull-up? Like male or female? Like I've a female client who on her 60th birthday did her first pull-up. And we trained for 2 years to get there, you know, because it wasn't the only focus,
right, sure.
but it was an important focus, and she really wanted to be able to do it. So at 60 years old, never strength trained before.
That's awesome.
And it was a great achievement. I have it on video. I'll show you.
That's awesome.
It's absolutely amazing. And I still train her to this day. Now she can do multiple, which is cool.
That's
and
awesome.
now she's like 65. So it's pretty cool. It's maybe 67.
Well, it gives us all hope as we get older, you know,
Right.
continue to improve because, you know, from what you've told me, you can still get stronger if you focus on certain things as you get older. It's not like it just ends and, you know,
Absolutely.
you're peaking out. It depends on what you focus on. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's always a primary goal, right, which has got to be tied in to some sort of, there's got to be a reason behind it. You can't just pluck it out of the air. Once you have that, then you can create secondary goals. But there are metrics, you know, like I said, like, you know, you got to be able to do a pull-up and a push-up, and you got to be able to do certain things. I like the get up is like one of my foundational movements, and if you're really good at it, it'll just become a warm up. It's a 3-dimensional movement from the ground to standing and back to the ground. And like I said, it's a good system at all ages. So that's another, you know, a movement pattern that's very important. But you know, these young kids, young guys, you know, you've got to be able to hit certain metrics. You know, pull ups. There's a few clients that we both know that couldn't do a single pull-up, you know, and he wants to be an athlete, you know, for body strength, you know, then there's some importance. So now we can knock out 3 or 4.
Sure.
And, you know, is there any need to get to 5? Not particularly, if you can cleanly do 3 or 4 at the moment right now. But, you know, it's goal setting. You know, a little bit more is always great until you reach a really nice number. You know, whether it, you know, for a push up for you, we capped it. And once we hit 30, I'm like, do we need to do 40? You know, you know,
I mean,
there's a lot to do with that.
That's the thing, right? Like, you know, I think as we get older, it's not even more, yes, we want to build strength, but also I think for me at least, it's like injury prevention, you know, like,
Absolutely.
And I think the more strength training we do, it's not just to get stronger, on the outside, as you were saying, but also prevention of injuries as we get older.
Absolutely.
Because I think some of the movements, and I don't know how much you think we should do stretching or yoga. You know, I'm trying to incorporate now a couple times a week instead of just once a week of just focusing on all that stretching. I don't know if you do the same or you recommend it to.
Absolutely. Yeah. One last bit on the strength element. You know, I was saying about, you know, can we do a few more reps or trying to achieve a certain goal? You know, one of the most overlooked elements of training when programming from a personal training standpoint anyway, is tempo. You know, isometrics. You know, there's talking about injury prevention. That is a huge area of injury prevention. Can you move under load with a tempo? Can you hold a certain position? for a period of time at length, and there are metrics that we want to try and achieve. But again, I think that's you go a long way when you talk about injury prevention and strength training. Tempo is a hugely important aspect, which you see a lot of people just banging weights out, banging reps out. But you start slowing that down and your reps are going to go in half, but your time under tension has increased. There's a capacity in that muscle to be able to move under load. And that's one of the biggest injury prevention elements.
Right. 'Cause sometimes we're just, I think especially me and a lot of, Americans in general, we're always in a rush. We're always trying to, do stuff. I think the lifestyle is such that, and then so we're just trying to get through our workout. And I think one thing I did when I started lifting was just trying to take it a little bit more easy on my sets and pay attention.
Yeah, some people I have to get them going. People that we know.
Yeah.
And then other people I have to just keep in the. You're one of those people I just have to put guardrails up. I have to keep you within the lines, and then I'm like pulling you back a little bit. But I think that, and then moving on to the stretching element, mobility is a hugely important factor, especially as we get older. And there are a couple of systems that I've employed, there's a couple of courses that I've done, which have taught me certain mechanics. You want to be able to fluidly move a joint through a certain range of motion. And if you can't do that, and then you load that pattern, that tension has to dump somewhere.
I see.
And it's going to go up or down, right? So if your hip can't move in a certain way, it's going to go into your low back, or that load, it's got to dump somewhere if you're moving into a certain range of motion. So again, there are hugely important metrics that we should try and achieve from a mobility standpoint, and stretching can help. Breathing is great, but spending time in certain postures is great. That's where yoga can come in, as long as it isn't excessive. As long as it's within the boundaries of what you can actually move into. I think it's hugely important. Absolutely.
What are the biggest, there's so many crazy nutrition trends, strength trends. I think all of us at some point in our lives, especially men, I feel like we think we can do something for a couple of weeks and we'll achieve this goal, when really it's really a long process. It's not and it's more about, the year. So what are the biggest myths that you see from your clients, from, the general public, what you see on TV? Is it just, is it that you eat this or that and you don't pay attention to the calories? Or what are the biggest myths that you're seeing out there? Today on whatever Instagram or TikTok, I'm not really on these platforms. What are the things you're seeing that you're just this is just not true?
To spin it positively, I think that I see there's I don't actually know who it is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a guy that's he puts literally is you're not going to get skinny eating one salad, you're not going to get fat eating one donut. Enjoy your life, kind of thing. And again, it's you've got to be consistent, but you have to have some fun with it along the way. And I think that's
eating is part of the human enjoyment.
Absolutely.
If you don't believe that, then that's
some great chefs out there.
Got
to eat their food. But as far as myths go, I think that the demonization of certain foods can be a problem. People go too extreme, whether that be, a certain, maybe that's circling back. It could be the fat, conversation that we had. It could be the red meat conversation that we had, because if you can eat, across the board, you're going to be covered in a lot of bases when it comes to vitamins and minerals and certain elements like the creatine conversation that we had before.
Well, speaking of that, there's a lot of new data on this about, obviously, I don't eat a ton of meat. Should everyone be taking creatine? I think of everything in life like a risk and a benefit. What are the risks? What are the benefits? From what I'm seeing, there's not much risk. Now, one thing we haven't talked about, though, is, the medications I prescribe patients when they need them are, regulated by the FDA. And, I know that what I'm prescribing, someone else there's a governing body that has kind of analyzed these medications, made sure they're safe or whatever. I feel like for supplements and nutrition, the
Wild West.
It's a Wild West. So can they just outright lie to you and put, hey, we're third party tested? Does that even mean anything? I don't know. Maybe you know better than I do, and maybe I don't like to plug brands because I want to just stick to facts. But is there something we can look at and say, hey, you know what? This brand of creatine, is safe, and maybe is there something on their labels that we can look at, or is it just you can freaking lie about anything.
Yeah, I do. I think that people are getting exposed now, especially with the the social media. There's a lot of people out there fact checking constantly.
Yeah.
And for me, when it comes to supplementation, I have my people that I follow. I have people that I trust. They do the research, right? They're the doctors, and then I will piggyback off of what the current research says, based on the people that I like and I follow, the certifications that I've chosen to do,
right,
based off of that.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, well, some people may say my medical degree doesn't mean anything, which is okay. That's their choice. But what you're saying is you're going to follow people that that they've done this for a long time. They have a good certification, and they have a good understanding and knowledge, and they're credible people, obviously.
Exactly, the credibility element. I am not going to read, 20, 30 studies on creatine, 100 studies on creatine.
Right.
I'm going to let someone that I trust do that, and then but it's not their brand of creatine. They're not trying to sell me anything.
Right.
That's
kind of
another
like this
element.
show. We're not selling anything.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that is an important factor. Talking about no downside. There's there's limited to no downside in a lot of supplements, but it's just expensive pee. There's a lot of elements.
What scares me is that I'm like, no outside person is looking at what's going into the supplements. That worries me. I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't seem to worry you as much.
No, because I'm not taking anything that's going to be like what could go into, whether it's creatine, whether it's a type of protein. Obviously there are various different brands and stuff, but the types of protein that you can get are as clean as it can be.
Well, you get what I'm saying. I'm saying they're saying that they're saying it's clean. I show you the protein that I take, but like, how do I because no one's checking it. There's no regulatory body. So that's what concerns me.
Well, someone's checking it. Maybe not a regulatory body, but someone's got to do testing. You can't get something on a shelf without having it tested. But who
I think
that
that's
is.
good. I think that's good to know. Yeah.
I think you just got to find the right people.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we all got to trust someone. People come to me. Obviously, they don't want to. No one wants to come to me. I mean, which is okay. I hope I'm out of a job one day. And maybe I'll just do this for a living. If all 200 cancers we figured out what they are. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things we talked about super important. Finally, my understanding is that you are now a fan of American football and fantasy football.
Huge.
And when did that change, like in your life, being from the UK? They have the game in England, but the times are off, right? Like, if there's not as many fans there because they're playing the NFL games in the middle of the night, And then second thing is you were a professional soccer coach. Was there things that those professionals were doing that are any different than the rest of us in terms of what you kind of recommended for them outside of their protein and stuff like that?
From a soccer coaching standpoint, so the soccer coaching element was on the field coaching players, right? So little to no nutritional elements.
You weren't really training them per se.
It wasn't a strength training element.
So then maybe I can ask you this: why is a U.S. team? Why can't we freaking compete in the World Cup? Like, why are they not good? Like, we have this nutritional stuff we talked about today. We have some of the best athletes in the world in terms of basketball, NFL football, obviously. A lot of different sports, but like, why can't we compete in soccer or football? I'm sorry.
I think that. I appreciate that. I think that was an easier question to answer 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, because it was it still hadn't developed quite to the level of like European soccer. And we're about to find out, the South American teams are really good too. In this Club World Cup, they're coming up against some really good teams. But the amount of money that is plowed into that sport in this country is unbelievable. It's so expensive to play for these kids. The amount of money these parents are paying for club teams and travel teams. Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's thousands of dollars a year.
Travel teams,
and you have two. So, it's becoming a bigger question now than it ever used to be, because there was this, they're not, the U.S. teams, the U.S. players aren't playing in Europe, right? They're not playing at the highest level. But now they are.
Yeah.
I'm biased, so what's the excuse now?
I mean, you're going to, we all have kids, and then whatever they're into, you're going to get into. And so now I'm kind of into soccer, and it's like, I want to see the U.S. win, man. So, do you think, if we could get, maybe they need you as a coach? I mean, because I think their coaches.
Maybe I'll clean the boots.
I think you could maybe coach them, because they obviously need something changed.
But now they have a world-class coach, an apparent world-class coach.
Is that what they have? I don't know.
Pochettino's he's coach for Tottenham, Chelsea, PSG.
Okay, good. So they're heading in the right direction.
And they've got a great coach. But I do think right now anyway, the team that they played in the Gold Cup, it isn't a full-strength team. Yeah. So I would like to see them develop. We've got a World Cup coming up in a couple of years, or next year, sorry. Yeah. So, I think that you're on the biggest stage. It's the most watched sport in the world.
Can't wait for us to whoop England, just like we did in 1776, baby.
Zero chance. There's no chance. You're lucky there was a fog.
Hey, man, I want to thank you very much for spending your time with us.
I appreciate it, man. This was fun.
I got a gift for you, and hopefully you come back and we'll talk some more about new things. And appreciate you, man.
Thank you, mate. Thank you.